The arrival. The Galactic Council chamber was a masterpiece of alien engineering. It floated in the void, a colossal structure of glass and shimmering metals, housing representatives from every known species in the galaxy. Inside, the council members debated peacefully, their voices echoing in a dozen alien languages. They discussed trade routes, planetary disputes, and technological advancements. It was just another ordinary session, until the alarms blared. A loud mechanical tone reverberated through the chamber. The central holographic display flickered, showing a massive object moving toward the station. It was unlike anything they had seen before. Sleek, dark, and enormous, the object was shaped like an arrowhead, its surface smooth and devoid of insignias. "What is it?" a council member hissed, their translucent skin glowing faintly with alarm. "It's a ship," answered a reptilian officer, her scales shimmering green under the chamber's lights. Her voice trembled slightly. "And it's human." The chamber fell into stunned silence. Humans. They were a young species, barely scratching the surface of interstellar travel. They weren't even members of the Galactic Council. Yet here was a human ship. No, a human battleship, approaching one of the most secure locations in the galaxy. How did they get here? An insectoid representative buzzed, its antennae twitching in agitation. "This system is protected by the most advanced cloaking technology in existence." No one had an answer. The ship continued its approach, silent and imposing. Its engines emitted no detectable energy signatures, baffling the Council's scientists. Defensive measures were immediately activated. Automated turrets turned toward the intruder, their barrels glowing with stored plasma energy. Fighters launched from nearby hangars, forming a defensive perimeter around the station. Still, the human ship didn't slow down. "Open a communication channel," barked the head counselor, a tall, silver-furred being with an air of authority. "We need to know their intentions." Moments later, a voice crackled through the speakers. It was deep, calm, and unnervingly precise. "This is the UNS Eclipse. We request permission to dock." Dock. The audacity of the request left the council members speechless. This was their territory, their domain. Humans were supposed to request meetings weeks in advance, not arrive unannounced with a warship. The head counselor's eyes narrowed. "State your purpose, human ship." There was a brief pause, then the voice responded. "We come in peace, but we bring news of great importance. Deny us, and you'll regret it." The council chamber erupted into chaos. Some demanded the ship be destroyed immediately, calling it an act of aggression. Others argued for caution. If the humans had truly developed technology to bypass the Council's defenses, then engaging them in battle might be a disastrous mistake. The head counselor raised a hand, silencing the room. "Let them dock," he commanded, "but keep our defenses at full readiness." The docking process was tense. The Eclipse maneuvered with surgical precision, aligning itself with one of the Council's external docking ports. Its sheer size dwarfed the alien vessels stationed nearby. As the ship locked into place, a single ramp extended from its side. The air grew thick with anticipation. Alien guards in gleaming armor lined the docking bay, their weapons trained on the ramp. The counselors watched through a live feed, their faces a mix of curiosity and fear. Then the footsteps began. Clank, clank, clank. A figure emerged from the ship's shadows. It was humanoid, tall, and clad in an angular black suit that shimmered faintly under the docking bay's lights. The helmet was featureless, a smooth, reflective surface that hid the face within. The figure stopped at the base of the ramp and surveyed the gathered guards. Then, with a deliberate motion, they raised a hand and removed their helmet. The face beneath was human, sharp features, piercing eyes, and an expression of quiet confidence. "I am Captain Ilias Voss," the human said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I represent the United Nations of Earth." The guards tensed, their weapons twitching ever so slightly. Captain Voss paid them no mind. Instead, he reached into his suit and retrieved a small glowing device. It emitted a soft hum, casting a pale blue light across the bay. "This," Voss said, holding up the device, "is proof that humanity is not what you think it is." The counselors, watching from the chamber, leaned forward in their seats. What was this proof? What secrets did the humans bring? Captain Voss's expression hardened. "We are here to warn you," he continued. "Something is coming. Something that threatens us all." Before anyone could respond, the glowing device projected an image into the air. It was a star map, filled with swirling galaxies and pinpoints of light. But at the center of the map was a dark, pulsating void, a void that seemed to grow larger with each passing second. "This," Voss said grimly, "is the beginning of the end. And if you don't listen, it will be your end as well." The screen went black. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the alarms blared again. Something else had entered the system. The silent threat. The alarm's piercing wail jolted the Galactic Council into action. Representatives barked orders in their native tongues, and security protocols went into overdrive. The docking bay filled with the sound of clanking armor and buzzing energy weapons as alien guards prepared for whatever was coming. Captain Elias Voss stood unmoving, his face unreadable. The glowing device in his hand dimmed, but its ominous warning lingered in the air. "What have you brought to our doorstep, human?" snarled the silver-furred head counselor through the communication system, his voice barely masking his panic. Voss looked directly at the nearest security camera, his expression calm but unyielding. "This isn't our doing," he said, "but it's exactly what I came to warn you about." The holographic display in the council chamber flickered back to life. This time, it showed a massive shape emerging from the outer edges of the star system. It moved slowly, deliberately, and with a chilling silence. Unlike the human battleship, which was sleek and angular, this new arrival was grotesque, its surface twisted and organic, like living metal. "What is that?" whispered an amphibious counselor, her voice trembling. "Something ancient," Voss replied, his voice transmitted to the chamber. "And very, very dangerous." The figure on the screen was no ordinary ship. It looked like a colossal predator, its hull pulsating with an eerie red glow. Smaller, insect-like vessels began detaching from its surface, swarming around it like a hive of angry wasps. "Activate the planetary defenses," shouted a reptilian general, slamming a clawed hand on the control panel. "This is a direct threat to the Council." Weapons systems roared to life. Massive plasma cannons mounted on the station rotated to face the intruder, their barrels glowing with energy. A fleet of alien fighters launched into the void, forming a defensive line between the station and the approaching threat. But the human stood still, unfazed by the chaos around him. "You won't win," Voss said quietly, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. The head counselor's fur bristled. "Are you suggesting we surrender?" "No," Voss replied, his voice steady. "I'm suggesting you listen." Before the council could respond, the first wave of fighters engaged the enemy. Streams of plasma and laser fire lit up the darkness, streaking toward the grotesque ship. But the attacks never landed. Instead, a shimmering red barrier appeared around the intruder, absorbing the energy like a sponge. The alien fighters buzzed around it, desperate to find a weak point, but the ship retaliated with horrifying precision. One by one, the fighters were obliterated, their wreckage scattering into the void. In the docking bay, the alien guards began to waver, their confidence shaken. Captain Voss took a step forward, his voice rising above the alarms. "Your weapons are useless against it. This isn't a conventional enemy. It's a biomechanical entity, a remnant of a war older than your council." The holographic display zoomed in on the attacking ship, revealing its surface in greater detail. What had first appeared as metal now seemed alive, writhing and shifting like a living organism. The smaller vessels swarmed outward, attacking the station's defenses with ruthless efficiency. "How do you know this?" demanded the head counselor. "Why didn't you warn us sooner?" Voss's gaze hardened. Because you wouldn't have believed me. Humanity tried to warn you decades ago, but your arrogance blinded you. You dismissed us as a primitive species. Now you'll see what that arrogance has cost. The council chamber erupted into arguments, accusations flying between representatives. Some blamed the humans, while others pleaded for cooperation. Amid the chaos, the reptilian general turned to Voss. If you have a plan, human, now is the time to share it. Voss didn't hesitate. Your fleet isn't designed to fight this kind of enemy, but the Eclipse is. We've studied their tactics, their weaknesses. If you give me command of your forces, we might stand a chance. The general's eyes narrowed. And why should we trust you? Because if I wanted you dead, Voss said, his voice icy, you'd already be dead. The room fell silent. Finally, the head counselor spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. Very well, Captain Voss. You have temporary command. But if this is a human trick— It's not, Voss interrupted. He turned to the guards. Prepare to deploy. We don't have much time. The holographic display showed the enemy ship drawing closer, its smaller vessels now targeting the station's outer hull. Explosions rippled across the surface, but the station's shields held, barely. Voss donned his helmet, his voice now muffled but commanding. Get your remaining fighters to form a defensive perimeter around the Eclipse. We'll draw its attention and hit it where it's vulnerable. And where is that? The general asked skeptically. Voss paused, then pointed at the holographic image. There, he said, highlighting a pulsating node near the ship's center. That's its core. Take it out, and the whole thing will collapse. The counselors exchanged uneasy glances. Trusting the human was a gamble, but they had no other choice. As the human battleship powered up, its hull shimmering with energy, Captain Voss spoke one last time. Remember this moment, he said, because today, humanity proves its worth. The Eclipse surged forward, its engines roaring like a storm. The battle for the galaxy's survival had begun. The ambassador's gambit. The Eclipse roared into motion, its sleek hull reflecting the crimson glow of the monstrous enemy vessel. Every alien eye in the Galactic Council chamber was glued to the holographic display as the human battleship weaved through enemy fire with surgical precision. It didn't just evade, it danced. Inside the Council's chamber, tension was palpable. Alien representatives watched in a mix of awe and disbelief. A race they had once dismissed as reckless and primitive now wielded technology and strategy that outmatched their own. But there was no time for debates now. The battle raged on. The calm before chaos. On board the Eclipse, Captain Elias Voss stood on the command deck, surrounded by a crew of humans who moved with unshakable focus. The air hummed with the sound of energy systems charging and weapons locking onto targets. Status report, Voss barked. Shields holding at 78%, Captain, a young officer replied, her hands flying over a console. Primary weapon systems online and ready. Voss nodded, his eyes fixed on the enemy ship's pulsating core projected on the forward screen. It glowed like a malevolent heart, pumping life into the smaller vessels swarming the station. Initiate maneuver Delta 7, Voss commanded. Draw their fire and prepare for a focused strike on that core. The alien perspective. In the Galactic Council chamber, murmurs broke out as the Eclipse performed maneuvers that defied conventional tactics. The reptilian general leaned forward, his yellow eyes narrowing. They're flying dangerously close to the enemy, he growled. That's either genius or madness. The head counselor's fur bristled as he responded, perhaps both. Humans seemed to thrive on calculated risks. Suddenly, the holographic display shifted to a new feed. The Eclipse transmitted a live view of its bridge directly to the Council. Captain Voss's face appeared on their screens, his expression calm but unyielding. This isn't just a battle, Voss said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. It's a warning. If you don't act now, your council will fall. The head counselor stiffened. You presume to lecture us, human. Voss leaned closer to the camera, his tone sharpening. I'm not presuming anything. I'm offering you a choice. Fight with us, or die watching. The artifact unveiled. Before the council could respond, Voss motioned to his crew. They activated the glowing artifact he had presented earlier. It floated in midair, projecting a holographic map of the enemy ship. The projection zoomed in, revealing intricate networks of biomechanical systems. This artifact contains ancient data, Voss explained. It's a relic from the same civilization that created these monsters. We reverse-engineered it to understand their weaknesses. The council chamber went silent as Voss continued, his words cutting through their disbelief like a blade. This enemy isn't just here for your station. It's here for the entire galaxy. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't spare. It consumes. The head counselor's eyes narrowed. And what do you propose, Captain? Voss's voice hardened. Unify your fleets under my command. Use your resources and our strategy. Together, we have a chance. The turning tide. On the battlefield, the eclipse unleashed its fury. Streams of blue energy erupted from its cannons, slicing through the enemy swarm with devastating precision. The smaller vessels exploded in bursts of light, but the mothership remained unscathed, its pulsating core protected by an impenetrable barrier. Captain, the weapons officer called out, the core's shield is adapting to our attacks. We need more firepower. Voss clenched his jaw. Then we hit harder. He turned back to the camera feed connected to the council. If you want to survive, redirect your firepower to the coordinates I'm sending. Target the core. The reptilian general growled. You expect us to risk everything on your word. Voss's gaze was unflinching. No, I expect you to trust what you've seen. You don't have another option. The final gambit. The council hesitated for a moment longer. Then the head counselor gave a reluctant nod. All ships, focus your fire on the humans' coordinates, he commanded. Across the station, alien ships reoriented their weapons. Beams of plasma and energy converged on the enemy's core, their combined might testing the limits of the barrier. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the shield flickered. Voss's voice rang out. Now, Eclipse. Fire all weapons. The Eclipse unleashed its payload, a concentrated barrage of energy that pierced the weakened shield. The core pulsed violently before imploding, sending shockwaves through the monstrous vessel. The smaller enemy ships faltered, their connections severed. Cheers erupted in the council chamber as the alien fleet rallied, obliterating the remaining attackers. The once dominant enemy was now reduced to debris floating in the void. The aftermath. As the battlefield quieted, the Eclipse returned to dock. Captain Voss disembarked once more, his armor scorched but his stride steady. The alien guards eyed him with newfound respect, or perhaps fear. The head counselor met him in the docking bay. You've saved us, he admitted grudgingly. But this alliance is far from permanent. Voss nodded. I don't expect your trust overnight. But I hope today proves one thing. Humanity is no longer your shadow. We're your equal, and maybe even your shield. With that, he turned and walked back toward his ship, leaving the council to ponder his words. In the vast emptiness of space, the silence returned, but this time it was filled with the weight of understanding. Something had changed in the galaxy that day, and it wasn't just the end of the battle. It was the beginning of a new era, one where humanity had finally stepped into the light. The artifact's secret. The aftermath of the battle left the Galactic station in disarray, but victory was theirs, thanks to the humans. While the council members had reluctantly agreed to fight alongside Captain Elias Voss and his crew, the uneasy alliance had not come without a cost. The Galactic Council's pride had been wounded. Humanity, a species they once considered too young and too naive to matter, had proven themselves not just worthy but capable of shaking the foundations of galactic power. Captain Voss stood in the heart of the council chamber, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the vastness of space visible through the transparent walls. He wasn't here to bask in the glory of the victory. There was something more pressing, something even more dangerous than the alien predators they had just defeated. The Eclipse had barely made it back to the station before Voss had ordered the activation of the artifact once more. "We need to understand it," he had told his crew. "If we're going to survive what's coming, we need to know what it knows." The artifact's origins. Inside the chamber, the artifact, small, yet deceptively powerful, hovered before the council. Its surface hummed softly, casting an ethereal blue glow. Voss had insisted on keeping it close. After all, it was the key to humanity's survival, a mysterious object that had been unearthed centuries ago from an abandoned ancient temple on Earth. What Captain Voss had not shared with the Council, however, was the artifact's true significance. It wasn't just an alien relic. It was something far older, something that had been left behind by a race that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy. This race had crafted technologies and weapons far beyond the comprehension of any current species. They had understood the power of manipulation, of controlling the very fabric of space and time. The artifact was a relic of their final attempt to warn the galaxy of an impending doom. As Voss watched the artifact, his thoughts wandered to the past, to the years he spent studying it in secret, to the warnings it had provided, and to the chilling prophecy it carried. The artifact had revealed a map of the galaxy, highlighting specific locations where ancient forces were stirring. Forces that had been dormant for millennia. Forces that would awaken once the balance of power had shifted too far. The artifact had not just shown them the path forward. It had revealed the terrifying truth of what was to come. The Council's doubt. The Council members gathered around the holographic projection of the artifact, their faces a mixture of skepticism and fear. Though they had fought together, they still viewed the humans as outsiders, intruders even. And now, Voss's revelation about the artifact, along with its cryptic messages, had done little to ease their wariness. "This artifact is unlike anything we've seen before," said the insectoid representative, his 6 legs twitching nervously. "But how can we trust this information? It's centuries old. And humans are here now," interrupted Voss sharply. His voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the steel behind it. "And that means you need to stop looking down at us as if we're still the same primitive species you once thought we were. The threat that's coming, if we don't stop it, everything you've built will crumble." The room fell into silence as the full weight of his words sank in. The councilors exchanged uncertain glances, but none spoke. They had seen the Eclipse in action. They had witnessed its technological prowess firsthand, and they knew, no matter how much they wished to deny it, that humanity's understanding of the galaxy was deeper and more advanced than they had assumed. "The map shows us a warning," Voss continued, stepping forward. The hologram shifted to reveal a collection of coordinates. "There are key sites throughout the galaxy, sites where the ancient race you call the Predators once waged war. These sites were not just battlefields. They were the birthplaces of a great catastrophe." He pressed a button on his wrist device, and the map zoomed into one particular star system. "This is the one we need to focus on," he said. "It's a black hole. Yes, I know it looks like any other. But this one is different. It's the point of origin, the center of everything." One by one, the council members leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the image of the black hole. Its sheer size was incomprehensible. Yet what really caught their attention was the faint, irregular pattern of energy readings emanating from it, flashes of light that flickered in an erratic, almost living way. "Explain," the head counselor said, his voice low and cautious. "The artifact," Voss began, "wasn't just a warning. It was a map to the heart of the galaxy's greatest threat. The ancient predators weren't wiped out. They evolved. They learned to travel beyond the boundaries of space itself, and they are coming back." The room fell dead silent. The implications of Voss's words were too large to fully comprehend. A choice of trust. The insectoid counselor shifted uncomfortably. "But why should we listen to you, Captain? You speak of danger, of threats, but there's no proof that these so-called predators are real. And even if they are, we're a united council. We can face whatever comes together. No, Voss replied, his voice firm. You can't, because this is not just a battle for your worlds. It's a fight for survival itself. The predators are not just a species. They are a force of nature. And unless you listen, your fleets, your alliances, they won't matter. The council hesitated. Voss was right. Despite their advanced technology and military might, the aliens knew they weren't ready to face an enemy so insidious. Finally, the head counselor stood. His face was grim. We don't have a choice, do we? Voss shook his head. No, you don't. The secret unleashed. As the council came to a reluctant agreement, the Eclipse prepared to depart once more. But this time, Captain Voss wasn't just leading a fleet of humans. He was leading an alliance, a fragile, yet powerful, unity of species who had no choice but to trust in each other's strengths. As Voss turned to board the ship, he paused for a moment. The artifact, glowing faintly in his hand, hummed softly, as if alive. Something deep within the relic shifted, and for the briefest moment, the hum grew louder. Voss stared at it, his expression unreadable. What else do you know? He whispered to the artifact. But it didn't answer. Instead, it flashed one final cryptic image, the galaxy, torn apart by a storm of black, swirling energy. And Voss knew then, whatever came next, humanity's true test had only just begun. The warning. The vast expanse of space outside the Galactic Council's station remained eerily quiet. The battle had subsided, but the tension that filled the air was palpable. Humanity had proven itself a worthy ally, but for the first time, the galaxy's greatest powers understood that the fight they had just won was only a small skirmish in a war they hadn't even begun to comprehend. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Eclipse, his mind racing. The map from the artifact still glowed on the main display, the coordinates pointing toward the black hole and the swirling darkness that surrounded it. He had seen the signs in the data, more than just a cosmic anomaly. What lay beyond that point of no return wasn't just an enemy. It was a force capable of rewriting the laws of existence itself. Captain, a voice crackled over the comms, snapping Voss back to reality. The fleet is ready. We've gathered ships from all over the Council's sectors. Everyone's on board for this mission. Voss exhaled deeply, his eyes scanning the faces of his crew. They were anxious but determined. The humans had fought beside the other races of the galaxy and earned their respect, but now it was time to prove something far more important. They had to lead, because they understood what was coming. Prepare the fleet, Voss ordered, his voice steady. We make for the black hole. But be ready for anything. This is no longer a simple mission. The gathering storm. Back at the Galactic Council, the mood was grim. Representatives from dozens of species had come together, their once bright hopes for peace and prosperity, now shadowed by the ominous threat hanging over them. Voss's warnings about the predators had shaken them to the core. And though they had reluctantly agreed to follow his lead, there was a palpable sense of doubt hanging in the air. The head counselor paced at the center of the chamber, his fur bristling with agitation. This human's information is accurate, interrupted the insectoid counselor, his many eyes flashing. The readings from our scouts confirm it. There is something coming from that black hole, and it isn't just any ship. It's a network, a whole civilization, perhaps one that spans the galaxy. The reptilian general narrowed his eyes. But how can we know for sure? Even the humans don't fully understand it. They barely survived their first encounter with the predators. Voss had been right about one thing. They had to trust. But that didn't mean they had to stop questioning. Because it's coming, the amphibious counselor said quietly, her voice filled with dread. And we are not prepared. The room fell silent again. They all knew what that meant. The rift unveiled. The Eclipse led the fleet through the vast void, cutting through the star systems toward the center of the galaxy. Voss stood at the helm, his face lit by the faint glow of the data screens. His mind, however, was somewhere else entirely, focused on what lay ahead. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates," came the voice of his communications officer. "You're going to want to see this." The main view screen flickered to life, displaying the black hole ahead. It looked like a vast, swirling storm of darkness, so dense and powerful that even light seemed to bend around it. But as the fleet drew closer, something more disturbing became apparent. "Wait," Voss muttered. "What's that?" At the event horizon of the black hole, the swirling mass of energy was not an empty void. Instead, it was alive, pulsing with unnatural energy. The edges of the black hole began to shimmer, forming long, jagged tendrils of light that reached outward like claws, as if the very fabric of space was being torn apart. "Initiate evasive maneuvers," Voss barked, his voice cold and commanding. "All ships, prepare for." Before he could finish, a pulse of energy erupted from the heart of the black hole. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, strong enough to warp space-time itself. The ships rocked violently as they were caught in the energy wave, struggling to regain control. Some of the alien vessels, ones that had been in service for thousands of years, began to lose power, their systems failing under the intensity of the disturbance. "Captain, the fleet's shields are failing," the officer shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "We're being pulled in." The alien ships were being dragged toward the black hole's event horizon by an unseen force. The black hole's gravitational pull intensified, its reach growing beyond the expected limits. The ancient message. Voss's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the chaos unfold. He could hear the crew scrambling to hold the ship steady, but even the eclipse was being affected. A dark shadow filled the main viewport as the black hole loomed closer, its dark maw ready to swallow them all. "Captain, look," cried one of the officers, pointing to the holographic map. On the display, a new anomaly appeared, just outside the black hole. It was massive, an object of unnatural proportions, and it was moving toward them with terrifying speed. It was no ship. It was something far worse. Voss's pulse quickened. The artifact. It had been right. The predators, in all their monstrous ancient power, were here. He grabbed the artifact, still on the table next to him, and held it up. The object hummed, its glow pulsating wildly, as if recognizing the presence of the ancient enemy. The artifact projected a new image, a massive structure, dark and jagged, floating within the event horizon of the black hole. "That's their ship," Voss said quietly, his voice filled with realization. "This isn't just a fleet, it's a living entity. And it's been waiting for this moment." The artifact's hologram shifted, revealing a terrifying message, spoken in a language that none of them could understand. Yet, as the transmission continued, a series of symbols flashed, their meaning clear. "We will consume all." Voss turned to the communication panel, his voice cold. "Prepare for a full retreat. We're dealing with more than just predators. We're dealing with the end of everything. And we have no idea how to stop it." The choice. The fleet reeled from the energy pulse, but Voss knew this was just the beginning. The predators were here. And this time, they weren't just attacking. They were bringing the galaxy to its knees. And the worst part, it was only a matter of time before every civilization in the galaxy would have to face what humanity already knew. This was a war for survival, not just for freedom. He turned his gaze to the crew, his crew, and spoke one final time before the retreat. "Whatever happens, we fight until the end. This galaxy won't fall without a fight. We won't let it." The galaxy would never be the same, and the predators, they were just the beginning of something much darker. Voss took a deep breath, his mind racing with a million thoughts. Whatever came next, humanity was ready. And this time, it wasn't just a fight for the humans. It was a fight for everyone. The battle begins. The Eclipse was one of the few ships still functioning at full capacity. The other vessels in the fleet, once proud symbols of the Galactic Council's power, were slowly falling behind. Their shields flickered and failed, their systems overwhelmed by the relentless force emanating from the black hole. The gravitational pull grew stronger with each passing moment, dragging the ships toward the maw of the abyss. Captain Elias Voss stood at the command deck of the Eclipse, his face pale yet resolute. The battle was no longer a matter of tactical advantage or advanced weaponry. This was a race against time, a fight to prevent their entire galaxy from being consumed by the ancient, unknowable force that had just awakened. "Captain, the fleet is breaking apart," shouted his communications officer. "We can't maintain formation. Half of our ships are caught in the gravitational pull." Voss's eyes remained fixed on the main viewport, watching as more ships struggled, their engines sputtering. Only a handful of ships, including the Eclipse, were able to break free of the black hole's growing influence. But that didn't matter. The Predators, whose massive living ships had emerged from the event horizon, were closing in. "Shut down the non-essential systems and reroute power to the engines," Voss commanded, his voice calm, despite the chaos around him. "We need speed. Get us to the center of the enemy formation. We won't outrun them. We'll have to outfight them." The Predators' assault. Voss had seen many things in his time as a commander, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer scale of what was coming. The Predators' ships weren't just vessels. They were sentient entities, colossal, living war machines that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The moment they crossed into real space, the stars themselves seemed to dim. The energy radiating from these creatures was dark and alien, an unnatural force that twisted the very fabric of space. On the bridge, the tactical officer stared at the redouts, her face a mix of disbelief and terror. "Captain, their weapons are beyond anything we've ever encountered. It's like they're tearing apart the fabric of space itself with each shot." "Then we'll tear back," Voss said with cold determination. The Eclipse surged forward, its powerful engines igniting. With a deafening roar, it rocketed toward the lead Predator ship. The crew, though terrified, moved with practiced efficiency. Voss had trained them for moments like this. They knew that there was no room for hesitation, no room for doubt. The first clash. The Eclipse entered the fray with a sudden burst of energy, its weapons opening fire. The concentrated blasts of plasma and kinetic energy hit the Predator ships, but instead of shattering their hulls, the energy seemed to dissipate, absorbed by their dark, organic surfaces. "Direct hits," shouted the weapons officer. "But it's like they're not even slowing down." Voss watched in grim silence as the Predator ships retaliated. Massive tendril-like appendages lashed out from the enemy vessels, glowing with an eerie red light. These dark tendrils reached for the Eclipse, coiling like serpents in the void. "Brace for impact," Voss ordered. The ship lurched as the tendrils wrapped around its hull, pulling it toward the Predator's mothership. The bridge was filled with alarms as the crew scrambled to compensate for the immense strain. "Captain, their attack is draining our power," the engineering officer shouted. "We can't hold out much longer." Voss's mind raced. They couldn't escape the Predator's grasp. But then, an idea struck him, an idea as dangerous as it was desperate. "Prepare the thrusters for a full burn," he commanded. "We're going to push back, using their own strength against them." A desperate gamble. The Eclipse's engines roared back to life as Voss ordered a burst of energy, directed toward the thrusters. The ship shuddered violently, its engines straining to hold against the immense force pulling them in. The tendrils, now wrapped tightly around the ship, began to glow brighter, the Predators seemingly confident in their victory. But the Eclipse wasn't done. With a screeching roar, the ship accelerated, slamming itself directly into the side of the Predator mothership with devastating force. The collision shook the entire vessel, and for a moment, the tendrils released their grip. The Predator ship staggered, stunned by the impact, just as Voss had planned. "We have them," shouted the tactical officer. Voss barely had time to process this small victory before another shockwave hit the ship. The Predators were adapting, their organic hulls regenerating almost instantly. "They're countering," Voss said, his voice steely. "But we've just cracked their armor. Now we need to finish what we started." The Galactic response. Meanwhile, the rest of the Galactic Council fleet had regrouped in the distance. They were struggling to stay in formation, their ships damaged and crippled. Some had begun to flee the battlefield, but others, those who still had a sliver of hope, remained. The head counselor, once full of pride and skepticism toward humanity, now knew the truth. "Humanity has shown us the way," the head counselor said, turning to the rest of the council. "We've seen their bravery. We cannot abandon them now." He turned to the nearest fleet commander. "Redirect all remaining ships to the Eclipse. We fight as one. This is not just humanity's battle, it's our battle." The fleet slowly began to rally, shifting position and forming a new line of defense. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Galactic Council's ships began to move toward the battle once more, each vessel desperately trying to align itself with Voss and his crew. The tide turns. Back aboard the Eclipse, Voss and his crew were pushing the ship to its limits. The Predator mothership, though still dangerous, was faltering under their relentless assault. Its tendrils began to retreat, and the faint flickers of light that had pulsed across its surface began to dim. "We've almost got them," Voss muttered to himself, watching the Predator ship systems destabilize on his tactical display. Suddenly, a new force entered the battle. The combined fleets of the Galactic Council arrived in a furious wave, pouring fire into the weakened Predator ships. The black tendrils recoiled, their strength faltering under the combined assault of plasma fire, kinetic missiles, and coordinated strikes. With one final, blinding explosion, the Predator mothership's core ruptured. The resulting shockwave pushed the Eclipse and the remaining ships back, but for the first time in hours, there was silence. The enemy had been defeated. Voss stood motionless, his eyes scanning the debris field left behind. The battle was won, but at what cost? "Is it over?" asked the communications officer, her voice barely a whisper. Voss nodded, but his expression remained grim. "For now," he said, "but we've only seen the beginning. A new dawn." As the Eclipse limped back to the station, the surviving ships followed. The Galactic Council had seen firsthand what humanity was capable of, and what they had been hiding all this time. But even in their victory, Voss knew the truth. The Predators were not the true threat. Something darker, something far more ancient, still loomed beyond the edge of the galaxy. The battle had only just begun, and humanity, for all its bravery and resilience, was the galaxy's last hope. The fleet came to a stop at the Council's station, the once peaceful hub now scared by the violence of the battle. Voss stood at the command deck, looking out into the abyss. "We will rebuild," he said, his voice steady. "But we need to prepare. The war is far from over." And with that, the Eclipse and the newly unified fleet turned their gaze toward the unknown darkness that awaited them beyond the stars. The final stand. The victory over the Predator fleet had been hard-earned, but as the surviving ships of the Galactic Council returned to their respective stations, a grim silence hung over the battlefield. The Eclipse limped back into the Council's docking bay, its hull scorched and battered, but still intact. The once mighty fleet, which had stood united against an overwhelming threat, now found itself fractured, physically, emotionally, and politically. Despite their victory, the true battle was only beginning. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Eclipse, watching the distant stars flicker like tiny lights of hope. His eyes betrayed little of the strain, but in his heart, he knew the cost. He had led them through the first wave of the Predator threat, but that was just a taste of what was to come. There was a dark, consuming force still waiting at the edges of known space, one that could not be stopped by mere tactics or firepower. "Captain, we've received a transmission from the Council," said his communications officer, breaking Voss's thoughts. "They want you to meet with them immediately." Voss nodded and turned, setting his jaw firmly. This would be a meeting of consequence. Humanity had saved the galaxy, but the cost had been high, and there were those who would be asking difficult questions. The Galactic Council's decision. The council chamber was packed with representatives from across the galaxy. The alien leaders, their faces solemn and weary from the battle, sat in a circle. Voss entered, accompanied by his crew, their presence silent but commanding. The tension in the room was palpable. They had just won a monumental battle, yet the councilors seemed hesitant to celebrate. Some were still processing the shock of humanity's role in this galactic conflict, while others were worried about the future. The head counselor, the silver-furred elder who had been skeptical of humanity from the start, rose to speak. "Captain Voss," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Your actions have proven that humanity is no longer the insignificant species we once fought. The battle was won, but the price was steep. Our fleets have been decimated, and we are left with few resources. The predators we fought are but a small part of a greater, darker force moving through the galaxy, and we must decide. Will we fight together or retreat to protect our own people?" Voss stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "I understand your hesitation, but now is not the time for division. This war is far from over, and if we split our forces, we'll only make ourselves vulnerable to the greater threat. We need unity, or we will fall, one by one." A murmur ran through the room as counselors exchanged uncertain glances. The reptilian general spoke next, his voice like gravel. "What you're suggesting, boss, is not just a fight for survival. It's a war against everything we know. The predators that attacked us are not the true enemy. The true enemy is far older and more powerful. The galaxy itself may be at risk." Voss clenched his fists. "I know," he said, his tone grim. "That's why we must act now, before it's too late." The head counselor paused before speaking again. "We are united in the need to survive. But the cost of that survival could change the very fabric of our civilizations. If we follow your plan, Captain, we may not just be fighting for our lives. We may be fighting for the future of the galaxy itself." The dark knowledge. At the edge of known space, the ancient force that had been stirring, something far darker than the predators themselves, had begun to reveal its true nature. Voss and the council now knew that what had come through the black hole was just the first wave of a much larger threat, an unstoppable ancient entity that consumed not just planets, but entire star systems, leaving nothing but emptiness behind. The artifact, still in Voss's possession, had begun to pulse erratically, as though reacting to this dark presence. The once faint glow now blazed like a beacon, its silent hum reverberating through the ship. The artifact had revealed part of the prophecy, an ancient message that humanity had stumbled upon long ago, hidden beneath layers of forgotten history. The message was a warning. A storm will come, and when it does, it will devour all. As the council deliberated, Voss consulted the artifact once more. It hummed, as if aware of his thoughts. The map projected again, revealing the galaxy's darkest regions, places where the predators had once emerged. And now, as the artifact's light flickered, it marked a new point, a massive, unseen anomaly deep in the heart of the galaxy. This was the source, the storm. Voss turned to the council with urgency. "This is it. The storm that's coming is not just an enemy. It is a force that feeds on everything, life, energy, even the stars themselves. If we don't strike at the heart of this anomaly now, the galaxy will cease to exist." A desperate offensive. The council had no more time to debate. The predator forces were regrouping, their remaining ships launching toward the anomaly, which had become a focal point for all dark energy in the galaxy. The council's unified fleet, though battered, was all that stood between this destructive force and total annihilation. Voss, now at the helm of the Eclipse once again, rallied the remaining ships of the Galactic Council. They had no other choice. The future of the galaxy was in their hands. "All ships, move into formation." Voss's voice thundered through the comm system. "This is our last stand. We fight for everything we have left." The Eclipse led the charge, its engines roaring to life as it hurtled toward the heart of the storm. The rest of the fleet, battered but determined, followed in formation. The predators had retreated, but this new enemy, the one that consumed everything, had no mercy. The fleet approached the anomaly, its gravitational field twisting space around them. The stars began to bend, their light stretching and distorting as the fleet drew closer to the center of the storm. The battle for survival had become the battle for the future, the ultimate sacrifice. As the fleets approached the heart of the storm, the reality of the battle settled on them all. This was no longer about tactics or strategies. This was about survival, about making a stand against an enemy that could not be reasoned with, could not be stopped by conventional means. Voss stood at the edge of the command deck, his mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. The time for retreat was long past. The anomaly had grown unstable, and only one thing could stop it. The artifact had shown him the way. An ancient ritual that required a sacrifice, a weapon capable of severing the storm's core. "This is it," Voss whispered. "The only way." He turned to his crew, his voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "Prepare the Eclipse for final impact. This will either stop it or we all fall." The fleet made its final charge. The Eclipse surged ahead, carrying the weapon that would pierce the heart of the storm. As it neared the anomaly, a final pulse of energy erupted from the blackness, striking the fleet with devastating force. But it was too late. The Eclipse plunged into the heart of the storm, the weapon it carried igniting in a blinding flash. The anomaly cracked, splitting apart as the dark force was driven back. For a brief moment, the galaxy was bathed in silence. Aftermath. When the light faded, the storm had been quelled. The anomaly was gone. The predators, their ships reduced to floating debris, had been defeated, but the cost had been beyond comprehension. The Eclipse was lost, its crew and captain gone. And though the galaxy had survived, the scars of the battle would remain forever. The Galactic Council, once fractured, now stood united in their victory. They had witnessed the ultimate sacrifice of a species that had once been considered insignificant. Humanity had not only saved the galaxy, they had ensured its future. But as they rebuilt, as they healed from the wounds of war, they knew that this peace was fragile. The galaxy had been saved, but the darkness was still out there, lurking just beyond the stars, waiting for its next opportunity. And humanity, now fully part of the galactic tapestry, would be ready. The final stand had been made. The galaxy had been saved. But the story of humanity, of the Eclipse, and of the sacrifices that had been made would echo through the stars for generations to come. The war was over, but the legend of what came next had only just begun.